Amy stood in front of the locker room mirrors, tears streaking down her face, making her makeup slowly run down her cheeks. With her hands covering her eyes, she couldn't see her reflection, but with the other students' jeers and insults ringing in her head, she didn't need to. Freak, they rang out. Loser, ugly. Every time a label rose to the surface, her body trembled as she sobbed into her palms. Slut, whore. As far as she cared at the moment, she would be fine if she died that day. At least she wouldn't have to hear the others anymore. But as the thoughts of suicide and escape began to seep into her mind, she heard the door open. Her heart stopped as she listened to the hinges creak, slowly ringing out another girl's entrance. Holding back the tears and sobs, Amy listened, barely lifting her head up to try and see the person in the mirror. But the only thing she saw was her ugly, weak, pathetic reflection. These thoughts cut her deeply, slicing through her heart. But as they cut, they released her other emotion that she had held in for so long. As long as she could remember, in fact. Rage. Anger began to course into her veins, warming her body, gradually burning away her pain and replacing it with hate. And the more she stared into her black makeup-smeared eyes, the more the anger filled her body, and the more her thoughts of suicide transformed into thoughts of homicide. Why kill herself when she could kill them? As the newer, more pleasant thoughts bubbled up from her soul, Amy began to hear something behind her. It was low, quiet, and distant. It wasn't the sound of a happy girl, or of a girl ready to leave for the day. This was laughter. Cold, dark, evil laughter, and with it came fear and panic that began to slide over her body, enwrapping her and covering her hate and pain. Cold sweat broke out over her forehead as paralysis bound her legs, for this wasn't the laughter of a girl, but of a man. Then, just as the laughter had started, it left, disappearing into the very air. The next sound Amy heard was the closing of the door and the deadbolt sliding into place. She was trapped, and just when the immediate panic was starting to lift, leading her to run, all the lights in the room disappeared, casting her into an abyss. One sound rang in that dark, cold room. The sound of heavy, rhythmic footsteps making their way across the room. To say that Amy was no longer angry would be a lie, in the same way that saying she was no longer hurt or sad. She was still in pain from the curses of the other students, and her hate toward them was still burning in her veins, but both had been almost completely suppressed by her state of fear and panic. Her heart was racing well past any rate that exercise could get it to, but all of the energy she would have needed to get it there was now gone. Each step of the stranger's feet sucked the breath from her body, and the willingness to run was taken with it. Thoughts of death began to float back into her head, but no longer of suicide or of homicide, but of her own death. Images of her lifeless, bloody corpse tucked into some corner of the locker room seeped into her imagination, and she was terrified. A voice called. Amy jumped and screamed, for the voice did not come from in front of her, but from behind her. Spinning around furiously, she could see nothing. Energy had found its way back into her legs, but her panic kept it from being used to run. Instead, she continued to turn, looking for the voice. It called again, still from behind her. The footsteps had stopped, and so had she. Slowly, steadily, she turned around. Overhead, her light flashed on, illuminating herself, the sink, and the mirror.
Amy, I'm right here.
The voice was quiet, small, and straight ahead of her. Blinking from the sudden swarm of light, Amy could just make out her own reflection, but something wasn't right. Above her head was a foggy figure. Her breath caught in her throat as she saw what it really was. The intruder's face. His hair was black with red streaks, and over his face he wore a black mask that covered everything except his eyes. Bright yellow eyes stared back into hers, making her feel open, exposed, and naked. She wanted to scream, but nothing came from her mouth. And she didn't dare run, because if he was that close, she knew she wouldn't make it anywhere. She'd just die tired.
Hello, Amy.
Amy could now clearly hear the voice, but it wasn't what she was expecting. It was low, cold, and distant. It didn't sound like it belonged to the figure now standing in front of her. He looked like his voice would be deep and dark. Even though this person's true voice was dark, it wasn't what she was expecting. This voice was more enticing than threatening. But there was something about his eyes that unnerved her. It wasn't their color, which she found eerie at first, but there was something about them that she didn't like the way one could go outside and just know, something horrible was about to happen. And after a long silence, Amy spoke. Who? Gulping down the last of her immediate fear, she finished. Who are you? The figure answered with a low, long breath of laughter. It floated around her head and chilled her bones, slowly tightening around her heart like a serpent.
That is a good question, Amy, and I promise you that we'll explore that later. For now, at least, tell me something. What can I do for you?
His words were like silk, the way they slid together, almost like a spell. What do you mean? The figure snickered.
I mean exactly what you're thinking. I can help you, if you'd like. Help you get rid of them?
Amy shivered. Somehow he was reading her thoughts, for at that moment the girl's jeers returned along with the pain and hate they caused.
You don't need to run, Amy. I'm not here to hurt you.
A long string of uneasiness slid down her spine at his words. Amy was confused. But then, why are you here?
Oh, Amy, dear Amy.
She felt the hand slowly lay itself across her right shoulder. Jumping a little, she moved her eyes away from the two yellow ones in the mirror to look down, but to her surprise, nothing was there.
I'm here for your revenge.
Revenge. The word was said with enthusiasm like a little kid on the night of Christmas. Amy was speechless. In the mirror, the two eyes narrowed. If she didn't know better, Amy would say that the figure was smiling behind his black mask. What are you going to do? The figure's eyes widened a little.
Me? Oh, dear Amy.
Amy noticed the feeling on her shoulder lifting away as the smell of smoke filled her nose. She began to cough as she looked in the mirror to see that the figure was slowly disappearing, his features fading into a fog.
I'm just a ghost.
What? As she coughed, she thought she heard the sound of falling metal. What do you mean? But it was too late. Because as she turned around, the lights came on and she was alone once again. However, her eyes noticed something on the floor, not too far from where the figure appeared to be standing. Carefully walking over, she bent over to examine the instrument, placing her hand around the handle of the large, wicked knife. She heard the figure's voice once more.
The choice is yours, Amy. Kill them or yourself. It's all up to you.